Welcome to the Connection Lab podcast. I'm your host, Alex Thomas, and I'm here to help you on your journey to confidence, authentic connection, and a deeply fulfilling life. Martin Stork, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, really excited for the conversation. And before we jump into, um, you know, talking about what social anxiety is, how common it is, the solutions for it, practical tools. First, if you can just introduce yourself and let the listeners know, how you got to this point. You're running a website called Conquer Social Anxiety, and so if you can just share your background and what led you to this moment.
Sure. So I'm originally from Germany. I think that's an important note to start with because culturally it's a very specific place. I always felt that my temperamental style and personality style is not the prototypical German person. I'm generally more extroverted, outgoing person, and that was not something I felt was always very welcome in my culture. So growing up with this type of personality and spirit, many times saying hi to people or just like smiling at them, and you don't get anything back. Like you just are not treated in the same way. That always made me feel like bad. I was like, what's wrong with me? So growing up, that was something that I always felt like, and back then I always thought that it has something to do with me because I did not understand that. First, this is somewhat a cultural thing in Germany, but it's also something that can happen everywhere in the world, and it's not necessarily, or usually it doesn't have anything to do with you as a person, but oftentimes it's the other person who, for whatever reason, acts the way they act. But that is how I got initially interested in social anxiety or anything actually related to self-confidence or feelings of insecurity around other people. And then when I was a teenager, uh, I had my first panic attacks in a social setting, different social settings. And for me, it was so weird because, as I said, I'm generally an outgoing and extroverted person in most contexts, but in others, I would suddenly feel not like that at all. So that always sparked my interest in psychology. I read a lot of things about all these different topics, like self-confidence. As I say, why would people feel insecure around others? And I tried a whole lot of things to, I would say, get rid of it. That's how I thought about it back then. I don't think like that anymore, but that's how I just wanted to get rid of these negative feelings, of these feelings of insecurity, of my anxiety symptoms. And that's how basically I got interested into that, into the topic of social anxiety. Then when I moved, I studied physical therapy in Germany, and then I found a job in the States, in Washington D.C., as a physical therapist. And when I moved there, um, first I noticed the culture is very different. I was so amazed when when people ask me how I was doing, like, hey, how are you doing? That's not something that would ever happen with a stranger in Germany. And I was like, wow, man,
Oh, really?
people are like me, like little things. And that already was kind of therapeutic for me. And then I joined a local, I went to a local support group meeting for people with social anxiety in Washington, D.C. And what I found was that people there were sharing how their difficulties with social anxiety. Many of them were like really struggling. I remember one person said she had been suffering for like 30, 40 years, didn't have any friends, was depressed. Like it was like tough to see and hear the different stories. And when I noticed there was a different type of discourse between most of the participants and me, because I went with the idea of, hey, let's share different techniques and practical things we can do to get over this or to gain confidence. But I was the only one doing that, and Wider was like, I think it's super important for people to understand there are other people who are going through the same things and share their experiences with others. That is super valuable, and I would recommend it to anyone really suffering in any way from social anxiety to share these experiences with others, and understand and see that other people are going through the similar things. But I also found like, why am I the only one here who
Mm,
is actively trying to do something about it? And after the meeting, there were several members who approached me and like said like, "Hey, wow, I never heard about this and that." I talked about a couple of different things I did. Back then I was really interested in something called social mishap exposures or shame attacking exercises, um, that where you deliberately expose yourself to exactly what you fear, which in the case of social anxiety is typically feelings related to shame, uh, or the
mhm,
anxiety itself. So on the way to the meeting, I would do stuff uh, like run through the pedestrian zone and jump up and down with my arms
mhm.
up. I would just
Awesome.
do ridiculous things to expose myself to the feeling,
Yep.
to reduce my anxiety. And I was sharing stuff like that, and then the people were like, "Man, I had never heard of that. It's super interesting." And people were interested, and they kind of convinced me to lead my own support group.
Mhm,
And that's what I did. That's how I started my first support group in Washington, D.C. We met in the public library once a week. And then after a couple of weeks, I was like, okay, how about another group? I did one group that was just focused on these types of exposure therapy exercises. And then the other one was a general like social anxiety support group where we talked about each member, what they can do this week to get better. That's well my initial start. And at that point, I also started to take my first classes at a local community college there. And that's how I initially got into like the clinical view of social anxiety. What I want to say by that is like my approach in the beginning was like very practical. And I noticed back then, like if I really want to help people well in these support groups, I need a better understanding of the human psyche. And that's how I started with my first classes. And later I studied psychology for real. And right now I'm doing my master's degree in clinical psychology and psychotherapy for adults. So I'm approaching social anxiety now from a clinical and from a research standpoint. Also, have been really interested in the research aspect, especially with regards to uh, the different subtypes of social anxiety that that I believe exist. To me, it's very clear if you go to a meeting like that, you talk to people with social anxiety, that not all of them are the same. Not all of them have the exact same problems. Not all of the people with social anxiety fear the same situations, and not all of them have the same personality types or the temperament. And that is something that I'm trying to do in my research to identify uh, different subtypes of social anxiety in the hopes that this will eventually help us to develop better treatment interventions for each subtype.
mm,
That means the interventions will be more tailored to each subgroup of people with social anxiety, because
mhm.
it's easy for someone with social anxiety who is not very introverted and reserved and is socially inhibited to think, I don't think I have social anxiety. But that is totally possible. And this person deserves help as much as as any other person with social anxiety. So that is something that I'm interested in from a
Awesome.
research standpoint.
Awesome. Love your background, and thank you so much for sharing that. I love how you're getting deep into the research side, but at the same time, your own journey has led you through this. You know, your own personal desire to, have your own confidence, and then personally working with other people and seeing the problem kind of firsthand. I think sometimes people looking for solutions with social anxiety or the people helping. Some people are usually just on the clinical side and maybe don't have as much personal experience or actually working with people and seeing like how it manifests day to day. So yeah, it sounds like your journey has led you really well to be able to help people with this.
I think one of the main ideas, and that's a good thing about CBT, for example, that one of the main ideas is that the patient becomes their own therapist. That is how it's usually framed, because eight
Hmm.
sessions, you can achieve a lot of things in 8 sessions, but as you just said, like usually something that has been ingrained like throughout the whole life, it usually doesn't change that quickly. So it's important to not just go to your sessions a couple of times and then your life has changed. It's important to keep implementing the things that you've
Hmm.
learned, uh, or like long term, if you really want to see the results. In most cases, of course, there are people who get better very quickly, but
Hmm.
um,
Yeah, totally
yeah.
varies. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I'd love to get deeper into everything we just talked about. One question I also want to circle back to is you said you went, you attended some meetups, and I've also experienced something similar where a lot of people in the social anxiety support groups, it seems a lot of people just, they just want to be seen. They want, to feel some connection and to be able to, because, to not hold this all inside. But it seems like most people aren't very much looking to, like, they're looking to cope with it versus trying to really transform. And I'm curious, why do you like, because I've noticed that in many groups that I'm a part of, and when I speak with other people like coaches that are also in the space, um, I'm curious, why do you think that is? Like, why do some people are looking for solutions and, like, looking to take action, whereas other people seem like they're not?
It's a very good question. I think there are several reasons for that. It depends on the person, but I think, and you just mentioned like they want to be seen. I think for many people that's the case. I mean, what social anxiety really is a strong desire to be loved, to be accepted, to be included in the group, if you want to say it like that. Um, and for example, if you go to a support group, um, you could say that there are people who are in the same situation, who are all struggling, who are getting together because of the same problem. Maybe what they don't need in this case is really to proactively work on getting better, because some people may actually find uh,
Mm.
this sense of
Like,
connection in this group.
yeah,
That
like they're
could be
getting that
one.
need met.
That could be one explanation for many people. Honestly, this is something I have been trying to understand for a long time. I remember, you mentioned I run this website about social anxiety, and at some point, I started to get into Reddit forums about social anxiety, and I noticed the same pattern. Whenever I try to contribute to conversations with a solution focused approach, it was, how it gets upvoted and downvoted.
Hmm.
No chance that these posts would ever like be liked by anybody, and I never understood it. It's, to me, it's also hard to understand. I think it's very painful to approach social anxiety, to address it. um so I can understand that, like, for many people it's just uh and cognitive behavioral therapy, the therapy that is usually the one that is recommended most,
Hmm.
is very intimidating to people. Having to confront your fears head on,
Hmm.
like,
Totally.
that is a very, very intimidating idea. That's why so many people drop out of therapy, because it's just too much to handle. So I think just the idea of doing something about it is often related to, oh man, I have to go out and face my fears, and that is something that is just too painful for me to do. So I
Hmm.
think it might also be related to that. And then if you go and like look at deeper things, where like social anxiety can is often related to psychological dynamics that run really deep, and it can be related to very difficult childhood experiences, um, or memories that are really, really difficult to look at. So I think it's a type of resistance that might be explained in many cases uh, by by the sheer fact that it's really, really painful to face.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in my experience, what led me to make a lot of changes in my life with social anxiety, one was just having, reaching a certain pain threshold of just, I've had so much pain and it's like, I don't want to, it kind of felt like I had no choice. Um, and I didn't have some, and just kind of thinking out loud now, like you say, some people have support groups and that kind of gets them to feel seen. And then in a way, it's like you can kind of feel more comfortable that way. Like you can kind of get by with it. At the time when I first wanted to work on my social anxiety, I didn't know of any support groups. I didn't know that was a thing. Um, so I hit this pain threshold where it was just like this sucks. Like I just can't live like this any longer.
Hmm.
And one another thing that really helped me, and I think was really pivotal for me, was one of the first programs I took to help with my social anxiety. Maybe you've heard of Dr. Aziz Gazipura. He has many.
I have
Okay,
not, no.
he's a psychologist that has a lot of programs around confidence, social anxiety. But one of the big takeaways, like right from the beginning of the program, that really helped me was, he talked about neuroplasticity,
Hmm.
and it was kind of like a big unlock for me. And for I think for a long time, I just assumed the person I was is just like fixed. Right? It's
Hmm.
like this is who I am. Like this is all I know, and this
Hmm.
is like my personality, and I can't change. Like this is how I'm going to be forever. And when I
Hmm.
started learning about neuroplasticity and started noticing how my mind was already evolving and growing in just a short time, it was kind of a big unlock for me that I
Hmm.
can do this. I can
Hmm.
actually become anyone I want,
Hmm.
and I see that as potentially one of the starting beliefs that if somebody wants to work on their social anxiety, like that's where needs to be focused on in the beginning, is getting them to believe that they actually can change. Because I think a lot of people, they don't believe
Yeah.
that they can change, they don't believe it's actually possible, and
Yeah.
there is a big fear of failure of like, okay, what if I do all this work, take all these programs, and I still am the same way I am? It's like that
Yeah.
is probably even more painful than them even trying. So to
Yeah.
avoid that, they don't even want to start.
Yeah.
um
Totally. I think one of the big, for me, like when you were talking about the neuroplasticity, for me, I remember like when I first learned about how mindfulness, like the studies uh, that they did with I think it was Tibetan monks,
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
I wasn't even related to social anxiety, but to see that the brain physically changes. That was one
Yes.
of the things where I thought, oh my God,
Mm.
that's something that not too long ago science didn't think it was possible
Mhm.
to achieve something like that. And I think that is one of the things that can motivate people. And I see, I write about social anxiety. And, I see that what people are really interested in are these uh, um, the structural things in our brain that make us fear social encounters. And if there, many people think there is something wrong with my brain, how can I fix this? There medication that can fix it. There is medication that can help, but there is something so practical, something like mindfulness that you can do that has actual effects and actually very
Mhm.
quick effects. Often it just takes a couple of weeks and you can see structural changes. So I think that's
Mhm.
something that can motivate many people to see, hey, there's actual empirical evidence that this works,
Mhm.
that you
Yeah.
can change. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that can be a big unlock for people that, yeah, when they see like the brain can like literally physically change and you can literally
Yes.
rewire, and
Yes.
then with that, it's like you can literally become, whoever you want to be, to an
Yeah.
extent. And yeah, for me, that was a huge unlock. And I think that's sometimes at least my theory is that what keeps a lot of people from wanting to take action is like they don't believe that they actually can change. And that is like the first
Yeah.
kind of blockage or one of the
And
blockages at least.
yeah, I think you're right. And I believe that in most cases, people with social anxiety or these insecurities, they have tried, maybe not like taken a course or sought therapy, but in many cases, people have faced the fears. It's not always possible to avoid,
Mhm.
people maybe have to give a presentation at work, or they have to go to this family meeting, and there's no way for them to avoid it. And they see that facing it didn't resolve it. So
Mm,
that is a problem, because therapy teaches if you face it, you will lose the fear. That is not always the case. There are reasons for that, but that is the
mm,
experience of people uh, with social anxiety very often, that I've done that 10 times and I'm still super anxious. It didn't get better. So why
mm,
even try? Why even bother? So
mm.
I think that
Yeah,
explains a lot why
interesting.
a lot of people don't seek. There's actually an interesting figure about uh, how many people who meet the diagnostic criteria for social anxiety disorder seek help, and it's just 1 in 5 people professional help, meaning talking to a therapist at
Mm,
some point in their lives. I would
oh,
assume that it's even less than that, because that's a
mhm,
study from 20 years ago, and there was a study that came out right before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, I think now it might even be higher, because I think the pandemic and the social isolation that was going on probably even heightened the numbers of people who meet criteria. But that study was mind blowing to me, because they screened almost 8,000 individuals, I think 7,000 and something, from 7 different countries all over the world. Indonesia was in there, the United States, a couple of other countries. And they found that it was individuals between 16 and 29 years of age, and more than 1/3 met the diagnostic criteria for social anxiety disorder. So when I say social anxiety disorder, that's a clinically recognized disorder. That doesn't mean that people who don't meet the criteria don't suffer. You can be below the threshold but still struggle with social anxiety. So
mhm.
it's a super common problem. In the United States was actually a country with the highest numbers, with 57% of these young people meeting the criteria. That to me was like,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
how many people are affected by this. And I think that can be, to many of your listeners, that can be something uh, that eases the pain a little bit, to understand that that is a very common experience,
Mhm.
um, to struggle in different social situations, to yeah, fear what other people will think of you, how they will perceive you, if they will reject you, if they will disapprove of you. That is something that you are certainly not alone with.
Yeah, sure.
There's so many people struggling with that.
Yeah, I think just seeing, yeah, I think shame. Yeah, a lot of people feel shame about their social anxiety, and it's because they think that it's something's wrong with them, and they're the one experiencing it. And I think when people can see and realize that it's really just a part of the human experience, is we feel social anxiety at times. Some people feel more and less, but it makes us feel less alone. Knowing that it's not just us, that we're not the only ones that are overthinking these situations. It's
Exactly,
it's quite part of the human
exactly. The
experience.
one, as you said, like the shame about the social anxiety itself um, leads to people not talking about it, and
Hmm.
because people
Yeah,
don't talk about it, people think nobody else has this
yeah,
problem.
yeah.
When and like that's why I think a study like that is so can be very helpful for many people to realize, like, no, there's nothing wrong with you. That's a very normal human
Hmm.
experience, and so many people struggle with that. That's for me personally, like being in contact with the topic of social anxiety every day for the last 10 years. That's probably the thing that makes me feel the most confident in social situations, just knowing that everybody else is just as
Yeah.
worried about these things as I am.
Mm.
uh, I think that has been very therapeutic for me, and I think it can be for many people as well.
Yeah. Yeah, that was big, really helpful for me once I began to be more vulnerable and open about my social anxiety. And all these people would tell me just how they experienced it too. And sometimes it'd be people that I'm like, wait, really? You experience it? Like, people that look like they're extremely confident. And
Yeah,
it that
yeah,
was that was really helpful for me to see that
yeah,
just how common it is.
yeah.
Um,
You,
yeah.
I think I think I can share that as we're talking about that. I don't know if you heard about the comfort zone challenges. There was a thing like a few years ago. I think about
Yep.
yeah, you heard it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it's been a big part of my I created actually a exposure therapy group in, New York City that we run.
Okay.
We did a bunch of conversational challenges, yeah.
Yeah. So uh, I played basketball with Till in Germany. And when I saw his first TED talk, he shared that back then he always felt so insecure in these situations, and I was like, oh my god, that was one of the guys I thought was like the most self confident guy, and I knew, I was like, oh my god, even someone like that felt this type of insecurity. That for me was a big thing, also, just to see how even the people you think don't struggle with that are also affected. Maybe not in all the situations, but that's it. Like for everyone, it can be something else. It can be for some people, it's just giving presentations, but it's the same type of fear that
Mhm,
somebody with generalized social anxiety may feel in most situations. Other people know these fears. If it's just going on a first date, any healthy person that goes on a first date knows how social anxiety feels
mhm,
because
right,
you want to impress that other person, you know.
mhm,
So I think it's some very very human experience that is very common, and if anybody tells you they don't know what you're talking about, it's probably not true.
mhm, yeah, and actually, we're already diving into kind of what it is, and before we get into solutions, yeah, let's maybe just take a step back and just define it for people, because yeah, sometimes I talk to people and they're not even sure what social anxiety is, and
Hmm.
they assume they don't have it. Um,
Yeah.
I think a lot of our listeners probably are overall familiar with it, but just to make it simple for everybody, how would you explain what is social
Yeah.
anxiety and what is like the criteria for it?
Yeah. By the way, just because you mentioned it, the study I referenced earlier, uh, 1/5 of the people that had a social anxiety disorder or met the criteria did not know that they had a clinically relevant problem. So
Mm,
it's just to point out how much the education about social anxiety actually is lacking. Uh, so, from a clinical point of view, social anxiety disorder is defined as an excessive fear of being judged, rejected, disapproved of, or humiliated in front of other people. So, any situation where a person may fear any type of negative evaluation, let's call it like that for now, uh, where they might feel scrutinized by others, can lead to feelings of social anxiety. Uh, but, however, there is one concept that is usually under discussed, which is the fear of positive evaluation, which also classifies as social anxiety. Um, so, some people, that doesn't count for everyone with social anxiety, but some people are actually not only afraid of negative evaluation, but could also be afraid of positive evaluation. For example, picture someone at an office who has to give a presentation. You'd usually say, okay, the person is afraid of like making a mistake or being too nervous while they're speaking, but they might also be afraid of making too good of an impression because now their boss might want them to do future presentations because they did it so well that the social expectations for them now rise. So the bar is higher now. So that's why actually you can also be afraid of positive evaluation that would also classify in this case as social anxiety. So I think to make it as simple as possible, it's the strong desire to generate a certain impression on others and the fear of not achieving that, the fear of being
mm,
seen in any type of undesirable way by other people.
mhm. And then with that, it's I think literally everybody can agree that they have some level of desire to create an impression, right? Like,
Yes.
maybe
Yes.
maybe not sociopaths, or I don't know, but maybe not, some people,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
think
Head on. Yes. Yeah.
almost the vast majority of people are, yeah, will
Yes.
have it.
I think that's also one of the crucial points that is can be therapeutic in itself. It's very important to understand that anybody with social anxiety who suffers from it and struggles with it, the goal is not or should not be to get rid of it, to eliminate it completely. That's not something that is attainable, first of all, because that is hardwired into our brains. Some level of social anxiety, it helps us. It's adaptive, some level of it. So it's not attainable, and it's also not even desirable. You want to have some level of social anxiety, because I think many people with social anxiety, as soon as some anxiety creeps into their body, they're like, they need to get rid of that. And that is an idea that intensifies the anxiety itself, when in
Totally.
reality, it's a natural feeling, it's adaptive. We evolved to have this feeling because it improves our chances of being liked by other people, being part of the group, being valuable members of our group. And there's actually an evolutionary perspective on social anxiety, which I also find very interesting and therapeutic in itself. When you think back to how we lived many thousand years ago, in small groups, it was very, very hunter-gathering times. I'm talking about now. Was very important that you were not excluded from the group because your survival depended on that. So if you were excluded, you didn't have access to food. You had to find it yourself, and you were not protected anymore. It was not likely that you would survive. So we are the ancestors of people who were socially anxious, because that uh, ensured that we would make sure that the group members like us, that we're part of the group, and that the higher ups in the social hierarchy, if you think about it, uh, usually in groups, you have people who are in the social hierarchy, higher ups, they're more dominant. If somebody lower than them wants to make sure, and they cannot compete with the other one for the dominant position, they want to make sure to stay part of the group. They don't want to um, they don't want to anger the other higher up, because that could mean or a fight or to be excluded. So social anxiety evolved to make sure that we are attentive to any social cues that could signal rejection, and that we are very aware of how we are coming across, to make sure that we are we stay part of the group, that we are liked by those around us. Of course, today we live in a different reality. It's
Mhm.
not the same. It's not like somebody rejects you today doesn't mean your survival is now in question. But we do still have the same brains. So I think it's important to understand that, because
Mhm.
this anxiety is a natural reaction. Some anxiety is natural, and the idea should never be to get rid of it completely, because, as I said, it's not attainable and it's not even desirable, because it does have an adaptive effect. Of course, when it becomes excessive, and we are speaking about clinically relevant social anxiety, there, of course, you want to find ways to reduce it, to feel more comfortable. But yeah, all that just to say that it's very important uh, not to live with the idea that you have to get rid of your social anxiety completely.
Yeah,
That's not something you should strive for.
totally. I think it's very helpful for people to understand like the evolutionary aspect of it. That our brains were designed, through evolution to survive, not to thrive, and to survive and to procreate. And social anxiety became essential for that. It is the reason our species was allowed to survive. We needed to be to worry about what other people thought of us,
Hmm.
and yeah, to see that it is kind of natural in a way for the mind to have socially anxious thoughts, and to not be, one I think that helps people to not be ashamed of it, to kind of expect it, that these
Hmm.
thoughts will never go away. There,
Hmm.
no matter how confident we will be, I think there will always be that
Hmm.
voices that try to tell us to be more careful,
Hmm.
and it's really learning how to one understand that. So then I think that takes away a lot of the power of it, when you
Hmm.
see that it is a natural thing that comes up. And I'm curious what you'd say. So we have the evolutionary aspect of social anxiety, and how about the cultural? Like, how does culture influence how people feel social anxiety?
Yeah, I just thought about it while you were talking about like the shame associated with social anxiety, because I think if there's a broad theory about social anxiety that differentiates between collectivist cultures, as we see, for example, in most Asian countries or Southeast Asian countries, compared to individualistic cultures, uh, which we see in most Western countries,
Mhm.
Germany, United States, Portugal, where I am right now. Um, so there are big differences because a person in let's start with the individualistic cultures. They usually the focus is on uh, assertiveness on the individual. The individual has to like show that they are special. They have self-esteem that is very valued. It's not valued to be introverted. Unfortunately, that's it's for many people who are introverted, it's really something that is difficult to deal with. That it's just not a trait that is seen as a positive attribute by most people, by society. I disagree with that, but that's usually how society sees it. So not having these attributes makes people usually feel very ashamed of these traits, of not having them and having different traits. Um, and the fear in individualistic cultures is, how am I going to be seen? It's more individualistic. It's always on the individual. If you go now to a country like Japan, for example, it's very important, the group. There's a type of social anxiety that was first studied in Japan and is predominantly found there, but it also exists in other parts of the world. That is called Taijin Kyofusho, which refers to the fear of making other people uncomfortable or that other people might feel humiliated. So here the fear is not on me as an individual.
Mm.
What are they going to think about me? It's about, how does the other person feel? So there's another type of social anxiety where people are very afraid of, it's a olfactory reference syndrome, where you think, oh, am I smelling bad? That could make other people feel uncomfortable. That is common in Japan. Then there's this, how do I behave so I don't interrupt the social group dynamics here? That is more the focus in collectivist cultures. So that's, as you can see, this has real world implications, because somebody with social anxiety in Japan might have very different focus of fear compared to somebody in the United States, for example. And that is, as I mentioned before, that's why I'm so interested in studying these subtypes of social anxiety, because it's very likely that the person who fears offending others or making other people feel uncomfortable needs a different type of intervention in the clinical setting compared to
Mm.
somebody who lacks assertiveness, and needs to learn how to make their own needs and desires heard by others. So
Mhm.
that, I think it's very, very important for research to dive deeper into these subtypes, identify what type of person develops what, and you always have to keep in mind the culture the person finds themselves in. I studied psychology in Colombia, and Colombia is an interesting case because I think it's a mix between the two. I think Colombia, there's no data on that, but I would assume that the type of social anxiety that I talked about in Japan is probably also very common in Colombia, because it's compared to Germany. Very in Germany, if you don't, if somebody invites you to go out to a party, it would be rude to not just say, if you don't want to go, to not just say, no, I don't want to go, but thank you. That would be the socially acceptable thing in Germany. Colombia, that would be extremely rude, and people
Mm.
would prefer to say, oh, it's my grandmother's birthday, but the next time I'll go. Everybody knows that's
Yeah.
not true, but it's just a nice thing to do there. That is very important to keep in mind, that the socio-cultural context a person finds themselves in.
Yeah. Very interesting. And I think you kind of alluded all this to say that there's kind of different types of social anxiety. Do you kind of have it, or are those kind of the two categories, like the with collectivist societies and individualist societies, or do you have like other categories for types of social anxiety?
Yeah, so there are several proposals. Let's put it like that. None of the proposals have a lot of empirical data yet. So this is in progress. I'm working on two studies right now where we are trying to gather empirical data to actually back up the claims that these subtypes might exist and might be relevant. But to give you a general picture, there's one of the proposals says, okay, how about we look at the focus of a person's fear? What is their focus? One focus might be, oh, I'm afraid that I will offend others or make others feel uncomfortable. The one that I talked about in Japan, right? Another one, which is usually the hallmark feature of social anxiety disorder, is my behavior. Are people going to think I'm inept, socially unskilled? Am I going to do something that will make other people think less of me? And then there's a third one, which is the social anxiety symptoms themselves, the physical or noticeable symptoms to others, like blushing, sweating, trembling, a shaky voice, any physical. That is actually that is a very interesting one because they're a secondary, a physical secondary result of your social anxiety becomes the primary focus. So these three are one proposal, which one of the studies we are running right now sees if there's sufficient empirical evidence to support these claims. Another one is to see, okay, what types of situations do people fear? Is it performance situations? That's the most common one. It's actually another not funny, but very interesting study where they asked a lot of people. I don't know if it was just in the States or in the whole world, but they asked for the main fear a person has in their lives. And before the fear of death, they reference the fear of public speaking. It's the
Mhm.
number one. Like,
Yeah.
so public speaking feel completely normal. Almost everybody has that to some degree. So performance situation would be one. Does the person only have it in performance situations and the rest there's no clinically relevant social anxiety? That person probably needs a different type of intervention than
Mm,
somebody who has something called generalized social anxiety disorder, where the person has social anxiety in virtually all social situations. One or two types of situation might not, but usually in most.
mm,
And then there's non-generalized social anxiety, where there are some areas where it's normal social functioning in some areas, and in others there's a lot of anxiety. That is another way of looking at social anxiety subtypes.
mm,
And then there's another one that I find very interesting, where they look at personality types. What type of personality develops social anxiety disorder? That is interesting because uh, as I alluded to earlier, usually the prototypical view of somebody with social anxiety in the society is somebody very introverted, uh, who is socially inhibited, doesn't talk much, avoids social gatherings. But that's not true for everyone. There are people who are extroverted, highly neurotic, highly extroverted, open. They score high on openness, usually creative individuals. Um, and then there's another one. There's low extroversion. That means more introverted, and they are very conscientious. That's the type of person who prepares a presentation for many days and knows exactly which word to say at what part. So there are different personality types, which I also find very interesting. And there remains to see if this is clinically relevant to separate between these um, different types of social anxiety. But yeah, that's
mm.
just to give you like a picture of what has been proposed and what is being worked on right now.
Very interesting. And I imagine the solutions are going to be different for every type, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, before we jump into the solutions, because I want to leave you a lot of time for that, where we can actually give practical tools to really help people. But first, before that, to get people to to really see why, like to get them, feeling some why of why they would want to try these solutions. Can you talk about how social anxiety, limits people's lives, limits people's happiness? You mentioned to me earlier there's a Harvard study of adult development that shows just how vital connection is. Yeah, can you just speak to that?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest studies and longest studies that has been done in the history of humankind, where researchers from Harvard University, I think in the 1930s is when they started it, more or less. They had a big group of individuals, I think more than 500, and they just followed them throughout their lives, longitudinal study, and every 5 or 10 years they had interviews with them and just asked them how their life was, how happy they were, um, what the problems were, and so on. And what they found many interesting things in this study. It's still ongoing. They're now with the children and the children of the children of these people. But the one big thing that they found is that the most important thing for happiness uh, is or are social connections. That's the one determinator that makes or decides if a person has a good life or not, if they're happy or not. How are their relations to other people?
Mm,
And that serves to understand how debilitating social anxiety can be if social anxiety shows up in most of your social encounters. It's going to have a drastic effect on your happiness. So
mm,
if what matters most in life is how we connect with others, but every time you want to connect, anxiety kicks in and you're just worried about what you should say, how you're coming across, if the other person dislikes your comment, and so on. You're missing out on one of the best or the best part of life, which is to really connect with others. I mean, your podcast is called Connection Lab. Uh, it's it is about connection. Like that is what we are here for. That is what we should do in our lives: connect with others. And if social anxiety always gets in the way, that can be a huge problem. And if it if that's the case, it should also be addressed. And uh, it's totally justified to look for solutions, to reach out for help, to listen to your podcast, to go to
mm.
my website, to talk to a therapist, to go to a social anxiety support group, whatever it is. But that is totally worth the effort because
Totally.
uh, we are here to connect. And if
Absolutely.
there's something getting in the way, this should be addressed.
Yeah, and I think for everybody, that's kind of the end result that they want is, to feel more connected. To I think the real kind of pain that comes from social anxiety ultimately is feeling lonely, feeling that you can't connect with others. And trying to solve social anxiety is really just a means to find kind of work on one of the underlying problems that are keeping you from connecting from others. But really the end goal is to get
Hmm.
people to feel that they can connect with others. Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, let's dive
totally.
into. So now that we've kind of touched on what social anxiety is, how prominent it is, why people need to work on it, some of the science of where it came from. So now let's say somebody is listening to this, they know that they have some level of social anxiety. They know how important it is for them to work on it, so they can, have a more fulfilling life, to have deeper connections. Where does somebody go from here?
Okay. I think there are many ways, and there's not one no one size fits all uh, path. That is
Mhm.
understand. I think for many people, uh, it can already be really helpful just to find the right book, to go to go listen to podcasts, to just learn, see, get in contact with what is going on, trying to understand a little better. Uh, as I mentioned, I'm looking at social anxiety from the clinical point of view. So I believe that if social anxiety is clinically relevant, where people actually meet the diagnostic criteria, where they're really, really suffering because of their social anxiety, I would always recommend to reach out to a professional, um, to a therapist, um, and start addressing that and not going it on your own, but
Hmm.
actually have somebody trained with going this path with you.
Hmm.
And then, um, if people who choose to do therapy, I'm not saying that everybody needs to do therapy, that is not the case, but people who are really suffering uh, should probably consider that option.
Hmm.
There's, if you go online, and that's one of the reasons why I started my website, uh, when you go online, you usually only find the information that CBT is the only effective treatment other than medication. Uh, and then while CBT is a great approach, it doesn't help everyone. And that is not correct information. There are other treatments, a whole number of them, that have been studied that have shown to be effective. And for somebody who maybe fears what we talked about earlier, the facing your fears head on and exposing yourself to these highly stressful, anxiety inducing situations, CBT might seem too intimidating for many people. There are
Hmm.
other options.
And before we
So
jump into the other
I
options,
don't
can you
know.
just, for people that aren't familiar, what is CBT? If you can just quickly summarize it.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah, of course. Cognitive behavioral therapy. Uh, it's it's a therapy approach that combines behavioral therapy and cognitive therapy. Behavioral, I mean, the names explain uh, already a little bit what it does. You see if you can change your behavior in order to have an effect on your emotions. And cognitive, you try to modify your thinking, your cognitions in a way that hopefully has a positive effect on your emotions. So CBT does or CBT aims to lead to positive changes via your behavior and your thinking.
Hmm. Yep.
And it's
Awesome.
one of the it's the approach that has been the most studied. There's a lot of evidence backing up that it works. Uh, However, it does not work for everybody, and it does not work for everybody perfectly. So these are things to keep in mind, but that's the case for any solution out there. That doesn't mean it's a bad approach or it's just normal. Like there's not one approach that's going to work for everyone. That's very important to understand, because I think one of the things uh, that is another thing, if you go online and look for information, is you will find individuals who claim that they have this one solution that is going to solve all the problems, and
Mhm.
that is very likely not the case. Oh, I'm not saying like I would be completely close to, if there's a cool solution somebody comes up with, I'm going to hear it. But I think you have to be really like critical with ideas like that. And from my point of view, there are many paths that can help people with social anxiety
Mhm.
to get better.
Yep.
Um,
And then kind of
and CBT is clearly
yeah. I think kind of the
CBT
a
is
big
clearly one of these approaches.
right. I think there's a little bit of a lag, but it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what if we can, if people know that there's many other solutions, so if somebody is listening to this, and there's so many different types of therapies, right? How can somebody kind of navigate this? How can somebody choose, which therapeutic approach is right for them? Which
Yeah.
therapists, how to actually choose the therapist and their, their modality,
Yeah.
which is right for for each specific person.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And that's something I think people are often left a bit in the dark, because somebody says, oh, I want to try therapy. They reach out. Most people don't know the approach of the therapist. They just go and then they see what
Mm.
happens. It might be a
All right.
CBT therapist, it might be a psychoanalyst. It's which are very different approaches. So it would be, my first recommendation would be just to read a little bit about uh, different approaches. Specifically for social anxiety, you can go to my website. I cover uh, all of the big approaches that have shown effectiveness on conquersocialanxiety.com, just talking about the general approach of these. If you want to, I can just give you a general idea of the big different approaches, and then
Yeah,
and then I think everyone can, like, it's important to just try to figure out what you feel comfortable with, what approach makes the most sense for you. I think that's just a general starting point, I would say. So as I already mentioned, CBT, that's the one that has been the most studied. It doesn't mean it's the best, but it's the one that has most evidence to back up that it works for many people, where you try to via your behavior, you will gradually expose yourself to situations that scare you. Important is the word gradually, because there used to be something called flooding that was used 20 years ago a lot, where you would go right away to the most scary event that you can imagine. For example, giving a speech in front of 100 people. That is not really recommended anymore. And usually a CBT therapist is going to do that gradually. So you make a list, a hierarchy of situations that you find scary, maybe starting with asking a stranger on the street for directions to a library or something like that. And then you would increase with a hierarchy. Each step increases the anxiety a little bit. And then one of the main parts of this therapy is that in a structured way, you expose yourself to the situation. You stay in the situation about 2, 3, 4 minutes, depends, until the anxiety reduces. That's very important. So the person exposes themselves to the anxiety-inducing situation until the anxiety reduces. And that's something that is going to happen because the brain sees, oh, wow, this is not dangerous for my survival, so I don't need to be afraid. And if that is repeated, the brain learns this is not something I need to be afraid of. And then once that is done, the next step is tackled. And like that, the hierarchy or the ladder is being completed. So that's a step-by-step approach. And in addition to that, cognitions are worked on and modified, where you can think, okay, what is your biggest fear in this situation? If you ask a stranger for directions, or maybe they ignore me and I will feel bad, for example. Okay, then let's think about what would be the consequence. And like that, the person can become a bit more flexible with very rigid ideas, because these ideas, if the ideas are very rigid, they can lead to a lot of anxiety. But by considering other alternatives, anxiety can be reduced. That's the two big things in traditional CBT that can have a very positive effect on people if they are applied in the right way.
Yeah. So essentially, it's getting people to challenge their way of thinking, to adopt new ways of thinking, and then to adopt new behaviors and
Exactly.
to get experience
Exactly.
doing that.
Exactly. And I would argue that probably it doesn't matter what type of therapy you do. In the end, these two things will somehow be a part of it. Maybe they're not the focus of the therapy itself, but these things are going to happen probably, that somehow the thinking about social situations changes, and the behavior probably also changes because now situations are not avoided anymore. So that would be like the biggest, most talked about approach, and you will probably find a CBT therapist close to wherever you live. Like if you live in a very rural area, maybe that's going to be difficult, but every small city even has CBT therapists. I would then say another big approach is psychodynamic therapy. That's an umbrella term I'm just going to like simplify it and say all the therapies that somehow evolved from Freud's initial ideas. And there are different types of psychodynamic therapy, but the main thing of it is you talk about your childhood and you try to identify any unconscious patterns, conflicts, or dynamics that could be causing social anxiety. Um,
Mm.
and before I get like a little deeper into that, very interesting study was done in 2013 until 2015. I think they did a 2-year follow-up. They compared CBT, 12 sessions of CBT, to 12 sessions, I think, of psychodynamic therapy. And they found that for social anxiety specifically, and they found that right after treatment, they were all like CBT was slightly more effective, not much, but slightly. 2 years later, they had exactly the same effectiveness. So
Mm.
psychodynamic therapy has gotten a lot of critique, especially from the CBT area, fraction. But there is actually evidence now that suggests it's just as effective as CBT. So it's a very valid approach for those who are open to explore their childhood, to explore their close relationships in detail with a therapist, to see if there are any unconscious things, who are interested in dream analysis, for example. I find that fascinating. It's a very introspective approach. And then for many people who don't resonate well, or CBT doesn't resonate well with them, that's a very valid and very different approach that empirically validated can lead to similar results as CBT. So these are the two
Interesting.
big ones. And then
And with just a question with psychodynamic therapy, so people are getting more insights about kind of why they're doing these things, kind of the patterns.
yes,
Is it just the insight that gets people like how does the insight get people to actually to change? How does it affect
good
their social
question.
anxiety?
Good question. Yes, there's a theory that says just the insight can already have a therapeutic effect. Let me give you an example, maybe. Uh, think of someone with social anxiety who grew up in a family where they were never like, they were not important. Like their needs were not important, and they always had to cater to other people's needs and like make sure everybody else was happy. So they never learned that their own needs and wishes are important. Their anger is suppressed because they're not allowed to be angry. Uh, and this person now is an adult. And whenever they are in social situations, or just let's say there are some specific social situations where they suddenly feel social anxiety and they cannot explain why, they don't understand it, but this anxiety comes up. This might be an unconscious anxiety reaction or an unconscious attempt to resolve a dilemma. The person now is in a situation where the dilemma is, okay, I need to consider everybody's needs here. I need to make the other person happy. But man, I also have my own needs and my own desires. And if I am with others, I only pay attention to the others, never to myself. So the anxiety in this case could show up as a symptom to have the person avoid these situations so they can actually take care of their own needs. And just understanding this, even if they don't act upon it now and say, okay, uh, I'm going to take care of my own needs, and I'm going to tell others that, hey, I want to watch this movie and not that one. Even if they don't do that, just the insight can already have a therapeutic effect, because now the unconscious does not need to create that anxiety anymore to resolve the dilemma. Now the person can make a conscious choice
Mm.
about how they're going to handle this. So it's a very different approach compared to CBT. And to your question, yes, the insight can already have a therapeutic effect and reduce anxiety. But also, like, what is really powerful is this insight about, hey, that is what I need. I now have a choice. I can learn to take my own needs into account even when I'm with others, which
Yeah.
then obviously can increase, not only decrease anxiety, but actually increase the person's happiness and well-being when they are with others, lead to better
Yeah.
connections in the end.
Hmm. Very interesting because I think that's kind of I think this can be applied to like I would say all types of therapy that awareness is a big key part of it. When we bring our awareness to it, when we can see these insights, we no longer have to act unconsciously. Like, it's like now we have the option to have a conscious reaction that only came
Mm-hmm.
because we're aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Mhm.
As you said, it could probably that's a key element of all type of therapy, in one way or another. This raising awareness of what is going on inside us with
Mhm.
our behavior, with our emotions, with our thoughts.
Mhm. So that we can react in a conscious way, right?
Hmm.
Not just
Hmm.
do the automatic pattern.
Exactly. Would you like me to get into a couple of other therapies?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, because there are some new developments in the CBT area, which I think are very interesting, which are the acceptance and commitment therapy and metacognitive therapy. These are officially fall under the umbrella of CBT, but they're kind of their own therapy approaches because they have some uh, important differences compared to CBT. Acceptance and commitment therapy is probably going to be very, very helpful to those who struggle with their anxiety symptoms, who or physical anxiety symptoms or their thoughts. Everybody who tries to put up a fight with any of these anxiety symptoms probably is going to benefit from it. What it teaches is that any attempt to suppress or modify such uncomfortable sensations in your body or in your mind is probably going to have a paradoxical effect where the anxiety increases, the
Yeah,
symptoms increase.
right.
The more you try to avoid that thought, the more it's likely it is to pop
Mm,
up again.
yes.
So, what acceptance and commitment therapy does is it attempts to shift this mindset and say, look, it's not something that you are going to be able to avoid. What matters, or the best strategy that you can do, is accept that these things happen. They are uncomfortable. It doesn't mean you're going to like that or that you have to like it, but accept them as part of socializing in this case, in certain situations, and connect to your values. That means, okay, for example, you value connection, you value authentic connection with others, and you value that so much. You focus on that. Not you don't focus on avoiding something uncomfortable, being rejected or disapproved of. You focus on something positive, the authentic connection with another person. That might include being a little anxious, or might even include being very anxious. Some
Mhm.
at the beginning, but you shift your mindset in a way that you focus on something, on what are you getting out of that, instead of how can I avoid pain, how can I get to something positive, how can I create a good connection with somebody else, for example. uh, so I think the acceptance part is very, very important for many people, because that's a typical thing that people with social anxiety do. They try to avoid any type of uncomfortable feelings and internal sensations. And then there's metacognitive therapy, uh, which is similar to CBT, but it goes a level higher. It's metacognitive. So you don't think about exactly what you're thinking about, but you're thinking about how you are thinking. Uh, so to put this into words that are more understandable, let's say I need to give a presentation. I'm very worried about it. I'm like, oh man, they're going to, I'm going to sweat and they're going to think bad of me. I'm going to stumble over my words. And in CBT, you would try to like challenge these beliefs, see if really people will think so negatively of you. In metacognitive therapy, you think about, what are you doing here? You are worrying. You are worrying about a future situation, and does that actually help you, or does it
Mhm.
only increase your anxiety? Is there anything that really helps? If you, of course, you want to prepare your presentation and, okay, make sure that everything is more or less well prepared. But any anything more than that is probably going to only increase your anxiety if you worry about all the different things that could go wrong. So what metacognitive therapy does, it identifies these thought processes, worrying, or after a situation that didn't go that well, ruminating. Uh, Mainly these two things usually increase anxiety instead of reducing it. But people usually have the idea that the more I worry, the more prepared I will be, and I will avoid negative outcomes. And when I ruminate about something in the past, I will make sure that I don't repeat this in the future. But these are ideas that are usually not true, and
Mm.
that just keep anxiety alive and shame when it's in the past. So that is a very, very different approach. And metacognitive therapy also goes into that. Like, if you are in the moment, if I am giving a presentation, uh, how much does it help me to have all my focus inside my body, my physical reactions, uh, my thoughts, instead of actually being present, being in the moment? What am I actually saying right now? What's the message I'm trying to convey to the group I'm speaking to? So people with social anxiety often think, oh, I need to control any signs of anxiety in my body. Uh, because if I notice that, if I notice that my heart beats faster, I will be able to control it, or I'll have a chance to control it. Instead of uh, being in the situation, say, okay, what am I actually saying? What am I presenting here? This threat focus on their body increases the anxiety. So it's also not a helpful strategy. So MCT teaches to do different things. They use something called attention training, which is similar to mindfulness meditation, where you train your mind to stay present, to direct your attention
Mm,
deliberately. And you realize, oh my God, I'm focusing on my the acceleration of my heartbeat right now. But you notice it, you can then refocus on the situation, on what you're saying, for example. So these are two new versions of CBT uh, that have shown a lot of positive results in studies. And I would recommend to anybody who is interested in CBT, these two approaches, like as an additional layer, would be great. But there are also just therapists who simply offer acceptance and commitment therapy or metacognitive therapy. If this somehow made sense to you, these two explanations, I would recommend um, looking for therapists who offer these two approaches.
yeah,
And then,
to me, to
yeah,
me, it sounds like seems like a key to both acceptance and commitment and the meta cognitive. It seems like mindfulness is a big aspect of it, of
yes,
being aware to the present moment of maybe you're feeling the anxiety, not resisting it, not
yes,
wanting just and
exactly.
just noticing,
Uh-huh.
just being aware to it, and with that
Exactly.
awareness, you can it seems like with metacognitive, you start seeing patterns of how your mind thinks it should deal with things, and then kind of challenging that and realizing that most of the things that it's doing isn't actually helpful, and coming up with like
Exactly.
new rules of when this happens, instead of me doing that automatic pattern of ruminating, finding a new something another thing that's going to serve me in the moment, whether that's actually
Hmm.
thinking about what I'm talking about or being present. And yeah, it seems like having that awareness, and then now they have a place where they can redirect their
Hmm.
focus.
And you're totally right. Mindfulness for these two therapies is actually included in the therapeutic process. So in both attention training, how can you train your attention? You can do it with mindfulness meditation. And in acceptance commitment
Mhm,
therapy, one of the main things is to accept uncomfortable thoughts, sensations in your body. And these are very, very important things. One important note, though, the acceptance has to be real, because it's very easy to try to trick yourself to, I'm going to accept my anxiety, so then I will experience less of it. If
mm,
that is the
yeah,
thinking, it's not going to work. There has to be a real openness and
mhm,
desire to actually accept it, to be open to experience the anxiety or the physical sensation or the internal experience that is uncomfortable,
mm,
for it to actually work. But yeah, I agree. Like
yeah,
mindfulness is a great strategy. It's very similar to these two approaches. Yes.
mhm. And the one thing I'll add for the acceptance commitment, yeah, something that's helped me, because yeah, accepting my emotions and being aware of it has been huge. It's for me, it's been kind of changing my relationship to anxiety. Whereas in the past, if I feel anxiety, I just think about how much I don't want it. Whereas now it's really just bringing presence to it, bringing awareness to it, and also bringing curiosity to it. And I think by
Hmm.
bringing genuine curiosity to it, that's been really helpful for me to dive deeper into it, and to no longer resist it, just to accept that it's there,
Yeah.
and just being curious about it.
I like your take on curiosity because, and that just doesn't apply only to anxiety, but um, emotions in general, they have an intention, and a positive
Yeah.
intention is behind every emotion. Doesn't mean that
Right.
it's always like good to for the emotion to or helpful to show up, but it's important to remember that emotions have a positive intention for us. They are trying to get us to act in a certain way. And for example, uh, what sadness, for example, is usually an emotion that people try as soon as it comes up, try to avoid. I need to distract myself. Anxiety, obviously, all the negative emotions really are often avoided. When in reality, sometimes the best thing you can do is just sit with it for a moment. Doesn't mean that if you're sad,
Mhm.
you have to lay on your in your bed the whole day and get drowned in your sadness, but just opening up a little bit, just feeling it and thinking about why you're feeling this right now, what is going on. That is a really, really powerful thing. And I think that's ties back to mindfulness because that's one of the things that it teaches to just
Mhm.
feel what's going on. And I think in many cases, we tend to just like try to distract us as soon as something uncomfortable shows up.
Mhm. Totally, and just yeah, I think it's a natural inclination to resist, but what we
Yeah.
resist persists.
Yeah.
Something that's helped me, I don't know if it's under metacognitive or acceptance, but yes, a kind of tool that I've used in the past that's helped me a lot is, when I'm feeling some anxiety of just focusing on it, putting my attention to it, really getting in tune, like asking myself, what shape is it? If it had a
Yeah.
color, what color
Yeah.
would it be? What's the texture? So I can
Yeah.
really just feel it with curiosity. And then I ask it, if it had a voice, what would it say? To allow
Yes.
itself to
Good.
express itself.
Yeah.
And then also ask, what is it really trying to do? And every single time I realize that it's trying to keep me safe. It has its own way of trying to keep me safe. This maybe sometimes a twisted way of trying to
Yeah.
keep me safe, but it's trying to keep me safe. Like it really wants what's best for me. And from that place, I can communicate it with from a level of actually gratitude and, not just acceptance, but also like thank you for, it kind of thanking my emotion that, is trying to do what's best for me. Um, and that way I
Yeah.
further accept it, so I'm not resisting it at all, letting it know that, I'm grateful for it. It doesn't need to go away. But then I would question, who am I when I allow this emotion to control myself? And who would I be without it? And
Hmm.
often I find that the way that it's trying to help me is kind of counterintuitive. It's trying to keep me safe, but the actual strategy is actually going to not result in me getting the connections or, the
Yes.
acceptance from other people that I want. So that's kind of similar. It sounds like to cognitive, where you look at the pattern and would find another. You find out that what the pattern is really doing, and ultimately
Hmm.
choosing another
Hmm.
pattern. And from
Yeah.
that
It
place,
ties. Yeah.
you can feel the emotion and accept it, but at the same time, you don't need to let it control you. Like it doesn't need to be the one that's going to be, deciding for you on what to do.
Yes. I think it ties back to the what we talked about, the raising awareness. You understand something that was previously unconscious, and it gives you the choice of do you want to keep doing that, or maybe you find when you think about it consciously a better solution. And you can, as you
Mm,
just said, I would recommend to everybody listening to this podcast to just go back and listen to what Alex just said again, because that is very powerful. And I think uh, it's a great way of relating to our emotions. And I think what you just said is very true. And I think many people could benefit from this approach. Uh, Having a different, starting to have a different relationship with our emotions, especially with the negative ones, and see what they are trying to do for us, and not just always putting up a fight with them, uh,
mhm,
but trying to listen and see, okay, what do I need? That's all.
mm,
That brings me to another therapeutic approach, which is a compassion focused therapy, where because this is basically self compassion, what you just described, where
mm,
you're realizing, okay, I am suffering right now. Uh, why am I suffering? and what can I do to be better? So there are two big. There's a compassion focused therapy, and then there's another. It's not a real therapeutic approach, but maybe some of you listeners have heard of Kristen Neff, who studies self compassion, and her approach is mindful self compassion, which combines the self compassion with mindfulness, uh,
Mm.
where you become aware that, okay, I am suffering right now. This is tough. And then what she does is she talks about how this connects you with other people. She calls that common humanity. So
Mhm.
the fact that you are suffering right now because of your social anxiety, for example, connects you with others. It doesn't, because usually when we suffer, we feel disconnected. But in fact, this makes you human. It connects you to the human experience, to so many other people who are going through
Mhm.
similar things. And then uh, she advocates to react with kindness, with self kindness. What can I do now to make the situation a little better for me? What do I need? So that's another, like, I would recommend anyone that just read a little bit more about that topic if that resonates. Um, and there's actually a therapeutic approach which is called compassion focused therapy. It's not developed by Kristen Neff, but it goes into a similar direction where you start to develop compassionate feelings, because social anxiety comes along with so much perfectionistic tendencies and self-criticism, um, that intensify anxiety. Uh, and self-compassion is a very, very good antidote to these tendencies of perfectionism, self-criticism, and the resulting shame. And there are studies that show self-compassion. For example, they did a study where people had to do a speech task, a public speaking task, and the group who had a self-compassion induction exercise before they gave the speech had way less anxiety compared to the others who did not do that. So there's a real anxiety buffering effect by being more compassionate with ourselves.
Mhm.
Yeah, and maybe just one last thing I also want to mention. I mean, there are other therapeutic approaches, but I also want to mention that there's the area of social skills training
Mhm.
that is sometimes part of CBT, traditional CBT, sometimes not. But there is a group of people with social anxiety, especially those who were socially isolated when they were children, so they didn't hang out with other kids really, and so they didn't get to develop the social skills that kids should be able to develop and have the freedom to, and the chance to develop. So for these type of people, uh, the social anxiety is often related to a lack of social skills because they never got to
Mhm.
develop them. In this case, if you think you're a person who falls into this spectrum, there's something called social skills training. And if you live in a bigger city, there's very likely an intervention available to you. And in this case, it makes sense to look for this type of intervention. Also, side note, most people with social anxiety think they lack social skills,
Mhm.
but in studies, they have objective observers rate, and they usually find that there is no lack in social skills. It's just the self-criticism talking. And
Right.
so most people will not need social skills training, but it's important for those who do to realize that there is a practical intervention available for those
Mhm.
who were not able to learn uh, social skills as other people were when they were children.
Mhm. I think that's a great distinction you made too, because I also hear a lot of people, they think they just need more social skills. And a lot of times I see people, they take programs or courses and it's really just focused on the social skills because they think if they can just say the right thing, it's going to, solve their problems. And yeah, I see most people
Mm-hmm.
don't have an issue with social skills. I think most people, if they thought about the person they feel most comfortable with, if maybe they do have a close friend or a sibling or whatever, they can ask themselves like, do they have social skills in that situation? I think for
Yeah,
most
yeah,
people, they're not worried about not having social skills. When
yeah,
they're with someone that they feel
yeah.
comfortable with. So the issue isn't the social skills;
It's a great, yeah, it's a great
it's
test.
how
Exactly.
comfortable you are.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a great test. I would say something similar. Like if you did not have any anxiety, a fear of
Mhm.
being judged, would you know what would be a more or less socially appropriate behavior? And I think your example is
Mhm.
great. If you think about somebody you feel really comfortable with, do you have problems? And if the answer is no, you don't have problems, or you would know how you would like to behave, but the anxiety gets in the way, it's very likely that you don't need social skills training in that case. But it's
Mhm.
very likely that you're just viewing yourself in a very negative light in social situations in a very self-critical way. In this case,
Mhm.
self-compassion would probably be a good approach.
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. And I think I mean, this is probably a whole tangent topic we don't have to get too deep into, but when I started my exposure therapy group in New York City, it started in the beginning for myself because I I started to really work on my social anxiety a couple years before that, and I took different programs by different psychologists and coaches, and a lot of it was revolved around CBT. Also, being more compassionate to myself, and I definitely got to a place where my thinking patterns were a lot better. Right, I became more of my own best friend, my own therapist, my own being more compassionate to myself. But I still found that I was still getting quite anxious in situations, and I realized a lot of these programs they told me to go do exposure therapy, um, but I just didn't actually end up doing it consistently. So I
Mhm.
figured if I can have a group of other people to do it with, the chances of me doing it are just exponentially higher. So I kind
Yeah,
of forced myself in a situation that if I can just start the group, then everything else will kind of work out.
yeah,
And
yeah,
for me, exposure therapy has been a really crucial part of
yeah.
helping me to work on my own social anxiety, to gain more confidence. And kind of where I was going with this is a lot of people in my group were it was a lot of men that were coming. There were some girls, but a lot of men, and a lot of them really they ultimately wanted to work on their social anxiety so they can improve in their dating life, because that was kind of the
Yeah,
the area that they were really feeling the pain, feeling more lonely, and they thought if they can just
yeah,
have more girls, that they would you know their life would be much better.
yeah,
So the social anxiety, it was really like working on that was just a means to improve their dating life. And
yeah.
something I noticed is, especially in the world of like self-improvement with dating, a lot of coaches and a lot of programs I see out there are really focused on the skills aspect of it. Especially for
Mhm.
men, there's a whole world of like pickup. I don't know if you are
Yeah, yeah,
familiar
yeah,
with
yeah,
that
yeah,
world, but
yeah.
I see that as, I see a lot of, especially men, kind of they have social anxiety, and that's the direction they go straight into, and it's kind of ends up being sort of like a trap where they think the solution is just learning social skills and just continuing to learn different ways of saying things, and that keeps them from doing kind of the more underlying work to be able
Yes,
to connect with their emotions and to develop understand their values and to really to get deeper confidence.
yes,
And it's kind of a the social skills is kind of advertised more as like a quick fix, and I
yeah,
think that's why it can be very appealing to many people.
yes. I agree with you, and I think, for example, it can be successful for some people, but I would also question, like, okay, how desirable is it to talking about the pickup culture, uh, to play and act, because that's what it is. You learn how to
Mm.
play
To
a
fake the
role.
confidence. Yeah.
Yes. So the anxiety is always going to be there. There's no no vulnerability. You cannot. You just hope that you're not found out.
Hmm. Yeah.
That is basically the essence of social anxiety. You are convinced that there's something wrong with you, and if somebody saw who you really are, they wouldn't like you. And I
Hmm.
think this whole pickup culture feeds into that.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
uh, to me, and I'm sure to you as well, real connection is built on authenticity and on
Hmm.
vulnerability. And um, I think for many people, being vulnerable when in the dating realm is a great, it's even a great strategy, because if
Hmm.
the other person judges you because of that, you have learned a lot. You don't want to be with that person. Uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
and usually people react positively to vulnerability. And if I have a first date with someone who opens up, who's vulnerable, I'm going to see that in a positive light. And I think for many people with social anxiety, uh, it's also important to see that social anxiety comes along with positive aspects. Uh, Many times, those with social anxiety are very empathetic. They have a good understanding for what other people like, what they don't like. That's something that is a strength that can be in a dating realm, can be a strength to understand. Okay,
Hmm.
how's this person like? What do they like? What do they don't? What don't they like? Um, this ability to connect. Yes, there is the anxiety, but there's also some strength that very confident people often lack. This ability to put yourself into the other person's shoes. Um,
Hmm.
it's often lacking in people who are very, very full of themselves, to say it like that.
Hmm.
And that can be a total strength. For example, in the dating realm, I think that's an amazing thing to have, and the right person is going to appreciate that.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think yeah, people with social anxiety, they're naturally a bit more empathetic. They're deeper listeners. Um, and yeah, they naturally have a lot of these strengths. And yeah, I just wanted to share that to kind of help people avoid this potential trap of just thinking that they need the social skills and thinking they just need to say the right thing, say the right lines, and in a way, it can actually I think one like the benefit I see like how people actually grow with that isn't the saying the actual things, but it's them actually just taking action. It's like that is their form of exposure therapy. Like at the very least, they're using that and trying different things. So that is always
Mhm.
helpful. But in a way, it can kind of like stunt someone's growth and limit them because they're you know they're furthering this idea that the person they are isn't going to be acceptable, and they're kind of protecting that shame instead of looking at it and
Yes,
putting on top layers and layers of this kind of new persona or fake persona of who they think they need to be. And if anything, it can prevent someone's growth, right? It can be like harmful in
yes,
the long run.
yes. I totally agree with you, and I think also, uh, even if you are successful with that in the dating realm, like, is that really what you're looking for, to like connect with somebody, but you can never be yourself? I would question that. And also, I think it's important to understand that in these cases, yes, you can learn social skills, and it's not always bad.
Hmm.
There are cool things you can learn, or have like a couple of tricks that for specific difficult situations. I think this is can be helpful. But if your real fear is to, okay, I cannot never say anything wrong, or oh man, on a first date I cannot run out of things to say because it's gonna be awkward. That's the fear. It is important to uh, first understand that that is your fear, to have awareness, but also to understand that it can happen, and that's not the end of the world, because that is something that many people with social anxiety fear. Like, if this and this happens, it's going to be catastrophic, it's going to be horrible, the other person is going to think, oh my god, like what's wrong with him or her. And that is an exaggeration. It's a very rigid negative belief, which is usually not the case. uh, Totally normal, for example, in this case, to have situations where you run out of things to say, and that's normal, and the other person is sitting in the same boat with you. It's not just you who is responsible. So, like, the confrontation with this fear is important to learn that you can handle it, and that's not the end of the world. And if you uh, have all these social skills, and you have all these tricks to always avoid that, I totally agree with you. It can, like, have people, like, in a position where they never really face uh, their own insecurities, and get stuck in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, great that we can just shed some light there for somebody
Yeah.
that might be just looking for alternative solutions. Yeah, I want to get deeper into exposure therapy. Before that, I also want to share kind of currently, like when I work, I have coached some people with social anxiety. I'm creating programs now, and kind of the three like fundamentals, like the core of what I try to focus on. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it. Is first one is mindfulness, because I think
Hmm.
it all starts with us having awareness of our thoughts, of what we're feeling, and what I see mindfulness as is the ability to direct awareness. In order for us to be mindful of things, to be present, it takes a little bit of focus, and we need to shift our attention from, perhaps being, ruminating over, some anxious thought, and kind of just becoming aware of it, right? So it takes a shift in attention, which for me it seems like that is a crucial, I think, component of any type of therapy, that is being done. If we want,
Hmm.
even with CBT, of being able to, um, change our thought patterns. Like first, we need the ability to be able to shift our attention, right? Because
Hmm.
if we can't do that, we can know that our thought patterns, like what the better thought pattern is, but we're not going to have the ability to actually pull ourselves away from that negative thought pattern,
Yeah.
without a practice like mindfulness. And with
Yeah.
mindfulness, you can start to challenge some of these thought patterns, be more curious, accepting these emotions, that sort of stuff. So that's one of the things I focus on in the beginning, is trying to get people to start becoming just much more aware, and having that kind of ability to direct their awareness. And from that place,
Hmm.
kind of my second fundamental is, I guess you can just summarize it as self-compassion. Is
Okay. Yeah.
once you become aware of all these things, you notice that you're having a lot of these patterns of thoughts that are ultimately, these that are causing, they're leading you to feel more anxious, and eventually you want to get to a place where you can just observe it, and then kind of, the next step would be start to sort of replace it, or maybe not replace is the right word, but you become aware that I'm having this thought pattern, and then you choose to have a more self-compassionate thought pattern, to be your own best
Hmm.
friend, so to speak.
Hmm.
um and to develop that as a practice. I think the better I really do think self-compassion is, can be thought of as sort of as a skill. The more we do it, the more we get better at it, the easier it becomes to do, and eventually it can become, start to feel a bit more natural, of
Hmm.
having these self-compassionate thought patterns. Because I think a lot of these thought patterns we have that lead to anxiety, these are being conditioned for a long time, even we can even say through evolution. And it kind of takes oftentimes some intentional effort to start to condition these more compassionate thought patterns. So there's, a lot of different practices, people can do on a daily basis to be more compassionate.
Hmm.
Um, but I think, yeah, those two kind of, to me, summarize like where people want to get to, is like they have the anxiety, they want to be able to be aware of it, change their relationship to it, and to ultimately have more self-compassionate thoughts. And
Hmm.
then from that place, the third fundamental for me has been, and to me it's been like critical for my growth, has been exposure therapy. So
Hmm.
I'd love to talk also just, yeah, just your thoughts on exposure therapy, diving into how people can do it. But to me, it's, and like you said, it can be challenging, right? For people to jump right into exposure therapy, and that's why I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
having a bit more of the, what I think as the fundamentals of mindfulness and self compassion first, can be better, because otherwise you can
Yes.
go and do some exposure therapy, and it might make things worse, because you might have this really negative pattern of saying how bad you did, or all these things, and not kind of have that skill to be able to shift your attention. um
Yeah.
but just curious overall, just on your thoughts on those three fundamentals. Like that's kind of my, maybe it's an oversimplified version of it, but yeah, I'd be curious to think of just, how you think of those three.
I uh, honestly, I think it's great. I actually do believe that the future of psychotherapy is an integrative approach, and I think that is
Mm,
where you're going with that. Sorry. First of all, I agree with that mindfulness is a really good foundation. Like we talked about that today several times. That how important awareness is, awareness
Mhm.
of our cognitive and emotional processes and our behavior in order to make any type of modification to that. And I think mindfulness does teach that, a lot of that. And then also the acceptance part. For me, a crucial learning or practice with mindfulness meditation was that I get very uncomfortable after like 5 minutes of sitting meditation. And I usually always have some pain either in the back or in my knee or something, or I want to scratch my foot. And just learning not to do that. Just the idea
Mhm.
of, okay, uncomfortable sensations are okay to have. And I'm
Mhm.
just going to decide to sit with that. Doesn't mean I'm never going to scratch my foot, but I'm
Mhm.
just going to see that as a learning opportunity. And I think that is great. Uh, Mindfulness is a great place to start. And many times I think when you practice mindfulness, ideas pop up in your mind. Cannot really explain why, but they just come up. And I think this type of space is important for anybody really to sit and allow things to emerge, because talked about before about distracting ourselves. So I think that's a good starting point for anybody, not only with social anxiety. Um, Self-compassion, I'm a huge fan of that. I think I would agree with everything you said. And something I would add is many times it can be hard to be self-compassionate because we have learned from when we were little in most cases that uh, we should not treat ourselves uh, in a way in this type of way, because
Mhm.
we need to like oftentimes the message is more or less we should be critical with ourselves because that helps us
Mhm.
improve.
Mhm.
And I think being open or like just thinking about it, if maybe this is a belief that hinders our growth and our well-being, just is a very important step in opening our mind to the idea of, okay, maybe self-compassion is something that I'm deserving of, and it can
Mhm.
actually help me live a better life, be happier, connect with others, and just help make sure that I get what I need when I go through difficult times. So I do believe these are very, very good pillars as I think you described them. And then
Mhm.
exposure therapy. Yeah, I want to like go back to one point. You remember when I talked about how in DC I had these two groups. One where we did the social mishap, the comfort zone challenges, the exposure therapy uh, part. We had two groups because not everybody who was in the social anxiety support group was open to trying these
Mhm.
things.
Right.
So it was like not everyone was open, and I understand why, because it's very intimidating. So I believe that I totally agree with you that exposure is super powerful. It's probably, I would say, I mean, science shows us, the data shows that's the single most powerful thing you can do against your social anxiety is to expose yourself to the exact situation that you fear repeatedly long enough for the anxiety
Mhm.
to reduce. That's the best, that's the most powerful technique that exists. Um, but it is scary, and there are certain criteria that need to be fulfilled for this to actually work. There's what I just said. It has to be long enough. Like if you just let's say um, I don't know, you give a presentation, but you just do it for 30 seconds, and then
Mhm.
you're too anxious and you stop and get out of the situation. That's not going to be enough because that's only going to increase your anxiety. It's important to stay long enough in the situation for the anxiety reaction to diminish somewhat. Doesn't have
Mhm.
to go away, but somewhat. Then you have to do it repeatedly. And then there's a concept I think it's very important for people with social anxiety to know, which is called safety behaviors, which are subtle behaviors that are aimed at avoiding negative outcomes. For example, when we talk about giving a presentation, it could be as simple as having the notes in your hand, or having a pen in your hand, something to play with while you're nervous. But let's go with an example of the notes. Uh, just maybe the person doesn't need the notes, but they're just there for safety. And then if the situation goes well, that means they were um, exposed to the situation long enough. They even do it repeatedly. but they had the notes in their hand. The conclusion might be it only went well because I had the notes. I had this safety thing with me that made sure that in the like, I could always fall back on that. Doesn't mean it's a bad idea to have notes when you give a presentation. It's just to show that this type of behavior can diminish the effectiveness of exposure. That's why, for example, people who use alcohol to help them socialize, to diminish their anxiety and be more social at parties or on a first date, if that's the pattern, if alcohol is always in play, the conclusion might always be, oh, it only went well because I drank. That's why I could
Mhm.
socialize. And that prevents the person from learning that they can socialize without it. Maybe they're a little less social, but they can still do it. So I think that is important to keep in mind with exposure exercises. But I do think that your approach and these three pillars uh, are a great strategy. And I think if you want to like capture as many people as possible, that is very, very good approach, because somebody who is too afraid of starting with exposure therapy right away uh, has these two other options to go to. And um, I think it's a good and a modern way of treating social anxiety, really, I believe.
Mhm. Awesome. Oh, I'm great. I'm very glad to hear that. And yeah, really interesting to hear. You mentioned safety behaviors, and yeah, the way I kind of see it is like a common safety behavior I see that I notice. Yeah, should at least people should be aware of is a lot of times people can do some challenges when they're in a group with people, right? When they're feeling the support. But then the group eventually kind of becomes that safety
Yeah,
crutch. So then
yeah.
the way I think about it is, safety behaviors can be great in the beginning. Like we don't need to just eliminate the crutch entirely. Um, Kind of the way I think about it is when, I'm giving challenges to myself or somebody else, I have people kind of rate what level of anxiety they have, like from a scale of I don't know, 3, oh, I mean 1 to 10,
Mhm.
and I have them choose the one that's maybe like a 3 to 7 level range of anxiety. And in the beginning, maybe it's okay if they're, maybe approaching, talking to a stranger gives them a 5 out of 10 of anxiety when there's a group to support them. And the more they do it, that gets lower and lower. And eventually they want to go and kind of do the next challenge, which is, being able to do that by themselves, where they can eliminate the safety behavior. So I think it's important for people to think about that when they're doing exposure, of like just think about those safety behaviors and keeping that as part of kind of the strategy of gradual, when you want to increase like the gradual
Mhm.
exposure, like eventually you want to, eliminate those safety behaviors.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I think it's important just to know that this might be happening. I think another very common one is people in social situations. Imagine I don't know, you go to a party and you don't know many people. Many people nowadays, it's so easy to take out your phone, scroll, check
Hmm.
something, and that is something that it's already automatic because we use our phones all the time anyway. But um, that can serve as a subtle safety behavior because, okay,
Yep.
you are exposing yourself to something, you're going to the party, but this never exposes you really to like standing there and, okay, now I have to like find someone to socialize with.
Hmm. Hey, Martin, you broke up just a few seconds ago. I can't hear you. Can you hear
Oh,
me? Oh, you're
yes,
better
yes.
now. Okay, you
Okay,
just
okay,
broke
okay.
up for a few seconds.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In internet connection unstable. Um, we are
I
good.
think it's better now. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, but in the end, you go to a party, you expose yourself to the situation. But the phone, in this case, prevents you from actually uh, being there and trying to interact with others, trying to socialize, because you always have this to fall back to. Yeah, I'm texting with my friends who are elsewhere. So it's very
Right.
important to become aware of the concept of these behaviors because they can prevent real progress in therapy.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's great for people to. I'm sure if they ask themselves the question of like, what is their safety behavior? I think people can
Yeah.
find, many of them, and it's good to just become aware of them. One
Yeah.
question that I wasn't planning to ask, but just because we're talking about safety behaviors, I'm curious what do you think your thoughts are on, especially in America, I see a lot of people with social anxiety. To me, it seems like they too quickly get prescribed some sort of medication, which,
Hmm.
allows them to temporarily, to relieve some symptoms of anxiety. But I'm curious your thoughts on just medication when it comes to social anxiety.
Hmm. Yeah. Just to start with, medication can act as a safety behavior. So just wanted
Mhm.
to like just get that out of the way right away, because if you have something that prevents you from experiencing the anxiety, you can expose yourself to whatever you want to expose yourself to. Your brain is always going to conclude that went well because I had the medication and not because I'm
Right.
actually capable of handling it. But in general, uh, medication is such a difficult topic to discuss, because you have a whole spectrum. There you have people that are very, very anti medication, and I understand that and I respect that. But it's also important to like consider the other people who are uh, open to considering medication, and whose cases, whose individual situations may justify medication. And then there's a whole, like, there are the different types of medication. Uh, I believe, I personally believe medication can be a great tool, uh, especially for those who are really struggling acutely. Um, um, it is a great tool. It can help them make the step into therapy. I don't think medication should be the solution, but
Mhm.
using it as an aid to get through difficult times, and to make the important steps that need to be made, I think it's a valid option. Of course, everybody has to decide for themselves with their psychiatrist or doctor if that's the right thing and
Mhm.
path for them. Um, I'm not like trying to convince anybody to take medication. But I think, yes, there are cases where it's totally justified. I also agree with you. Sometimes it's just prescribed too easily, too quickly, when might not really be necessary. So it's a sensitive topic.
Mhm.
Um, I think here again, awareness about this is very important, just to
Mhm.
allow the person to make the decision for themselves together with their doctor. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think relating it to a safety behavior is quite interesting and helpful. And to me, kind of the way I'm thinking about it is, yeah, like there's, I'm sure, many situations where the medication makes sense, and especially as a safety behavior, because maybe somebody, isn't going to be able to make, the progress without having some of that safety behavior first. Um, but what I would think is that it should be accompanied with like a longer term solution of, you can introduce a safety behavior first, and begin some therapeutic approaches, but there should be kind of a plan of eventually how to do this without the therapy, so you're not
Yes.
reliant on the safety behavior.
Yes. I agree. I agree. It should be rather like a short-term thing to get yourself going.
Mhm.
But the long-term idea should be to actually make psychological changes that allow you to live without the medication. Yeah, I agree with that.
Mhm. Awesome. Been loving the conversation so far. I did have some more questions, but I know we're already, I think, about 2 hours into this, so I don't
Yeah.
know if we'll have time for everything. But I guess one last question or topic, if you still have time, is just some practical tools that anyone listening today that is experiencing social anxiety. What are some practical and ideally simple tools that they can start implementing today?
Yes. I think one thing, and then that uh, like puts together what we've been talking about, is something that I usually recommend, and it's usually helpful for most people with social anxiety, which is addressing uh, the tendency to avoid anxiety
Mhm.
symptoms, combined with the mindfulness and attention focus we've been talking about. So let's just walk through a quick situation where, like, if you are listening to this and you suffer from social anxiety, you probably have your typical examples of situations where you get into the situation. Before the situation, you already feel anxious. You get there, you feel anxious, you focus, you zone in on what's happening in your body, in your mind. Try to imagine how the other person is seeing you. When this happens, usually, I'm assuming now, you're acutely aware of all of this, of your symptoms, anxiety symptoms. This could be physical sensations in your body, or your thoughts about how others are perceiving you, or anxious thoughts, uh, and trying in some way to either suppress, to reduce it, or to modify this in some way, which tends to make the anxiety symptoms worse.
Mhm.
So instead of that, and like thinking of what we talked about today, awareness, or let's say, you, as soon as you notice that this is happening, and if you practice mindfulness regularly, you will notice this quite quickly. You're like, okay, I'm focusing on my heartbeat, or I'm focusing on sweating, or I'm thinking, oh my god, what is this person thinking about me? As soon as you notice that, instead of trying to fight it, you just say, okay, this is happening, and then just say something to yourself that uh, that helps you to accept that. Something like, okay, I'm sweating right now, and I'm trying, and that's okay, and that's okay. Just some statement that helps to accept that. And as soon as you did that, you then gently focus on what is happening in the situation. As it's going to be a social situation, uh, you can focus on whatever is being said. You can engage in active listening. What is the other person trying to tell you? Or what are you trying to communicate? And if that is not the case, maybe it's before a social situation where you're worried, or even in a situation, you can do that. You can also focus on neutral stimuli, for example, something that you can hear, something that you can see. There's a technique where you, like, for example, try to find several things that you can see. Okay, then three
Mhm.
things you can hear, um, two things you can touch, like how you're sitting, and then the taste in your mouth. Things like this, something neutral. So this combines the ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and the MCT, metacognitive therapy principles a little bit, where you're becoming aware of a process you're engaging in, which is threat monitoring, um, and you accept that this is happening. You tell yourself consciously, I'm not fighting these symptoms. I'm gonna let them be here, and then you just focus on something related to the situation. And if there's nothing really socially going on, you can always just focus on something neutral. Uh, this interrupts the cycle. This interrupts the cycle of threat monitoring and worrying about what could go wrong. And you make the conscious choice to accept, which prevents that you exacerbate your anxiety symptoms. So
Mhm.
it's a very simple process. It's not easy to do if you're used to do something else, because you probably in your
Mhm.
past have never done that. But try to do this. Try to get used to this. With time, it will get easier. And the idea is not to not have any anxiety symptoms. That's very important to understand here. The
Mhm.
idea is to actually accept the symptoms and try to focus on something more constructive, like what is happening in the situation right now. That would be my recommendation, that
Mhm.
most people with social anxiety, I think, can benefit from.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's super practical and simple. And again, I think that's something, yeah, people need to have the expectation that it does take some practice, right? They might be able to become aware of those thought patterns when they're in the situation and become present for a little bit, and then maybe they notice they get pulled away from the presence and then go back to those thoughts. So it's not
Yeah.
like you just do it once and it's over. It's kind of you do it and then you get pulled back to the negative thoughts. You do it again, you get pulled back, and you kind of
Yes.
keep
Very
doing
good.
it. And
Yes.
it's a practice.
You're
It's like a muscle
totally right.
that you build. Hmm.
Totally right. Great that you said that, because that's going to happen to everyone. Like you always,
Mhm.
these worries come back. You're going to focus again, and then you just repeat the process. And
Mhm.
that's why I think your pillars are really great, because regular mindfulness meditation is a great idea for anyone with social anxiety. I would also recommend that, because this trains exactly these processes, noticing what's
Mhm.
going on, understanding that your mind is going to do these things no matter what.
Mhm.
You realize it's doing it, and then you can refocus your attention, and these things will get easier with time. But it's important to
Mhm.
just like invest by practicing these things regularly. It doesn't have to be uh, a very long time. It's important that it's. I bet you are very experienced with that, but I always tell
Mhm.
people, like, just start with 2 minutes a day,
Yeah,
something like
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a practice. I think that's a great just expectation. Like people should have that expectation and to kind of frame this as this is a practice. And the more you do it, you will get better. You know, it's kind of like
yeah,
any skill or muscle you have. It's a practice. And the more you do
yeah,
it, it will get better.
yeah.
Awesome.
Exactly, exactly.
And yeah, I think this is a great crucial like practical tool that anyone can do today, right? You know, when they're in any situation, whether they're talking to someone, just for some brief moments, they might notice themselves, you know, having some thought patterns of like, what do they think of me, whatever it is, and seeing if they can just interrupt that, even if it's just for a few seconds. It's amazing,
Hmm.
and just come back to the present moment and actually. You know, which ideally maybe is just listening to whatever the other
Yeah,
people are saying instead of listening to your own thought patterns.
I like to like. There's this example of thinking of thoughts, or in this case, can also be anxiety symptoms, whatever it is that you're worried about. Think of them as like you're sitting in a bus, and these are other passengers that at some stop they come in, and instead of trying to fight them and kick them out, you just let them ride the bus until they're getting out again, and you just decide to, okay, here they are. I'm going to accept that they're here, but I'm going to focus on whatever I'm doing right now.
Mm,
And at some point, they will leave the bus again.
mm,
I like to think of it like that. There are
mm.
many
Yeah.
such
I
metaphors,
like
but
yeah, I like
that,
that analogy.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Cool. I think that's a great practical tool. Any others that come to mind?
Yeah, I don't know why, but I just thought about something that is heavily under discussed. I think it's actually never discussed. It's another study we are running right now, because I find it very interesting. But it's maybe that's more psychodynamic tool, I would say, or strategy. Is mostly people with social anxiety uh, have not a lot of connection to their anger. And for some people, this might sound a little weird. Uh, Many people with social anxiety often don't feel anger at all, because they learn not to do that, because feeling anger and expressing it may lead to negative evaluation from others. So they have not learned to actually feel these feelings. That's can be an unconscious process. Not saying that's the case for everyone, but for many it is. And what we are studying right now is to see if there's suppressed anger, if the social anxiety is higher. That would be an unconscious process where like
Interesting.
emotional energy that is not felt in the form of anger might show up as anxiety. So I think another thing that you've probably never heard of in relation to social anxiety, but which can make, in my opinion, a real difference, is to start opening your mind to the idea that there might be anger that you are not feeling, and that it's okay to feel it. Because if you're, that doesn't mean you have to act out on it, uh, or that you now have to like tell everybody that you're angry with them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just talking about uh, acknowledging it and having it in your conscious experience, as we talked about before, about feeling your feelings like sadness, anxiety. In this case, it would be anger, because I believe, and as I said, we don't know that yet for sure, but it's something we're studying, is to, the more the anger is felt and not suppressed, the more the anxiety, the social anxiety reduces. That's the hypothesis. And I believe that for many people with social anxiety, anger is suppressed, anger is not welcomed, It's not even in their conscious awareness. And you have the right to be angry, just as anybody else. Um, that's nothing you have to be afraid of. It's nothing bad. It doesn't mean you have to act on it, but just feeling it. It's an act of self-compassion, I believe, and it
Mm.
has the potential to reduce your overall levels of social anxiety.
Oh, super interesting. I'd love to hear more about the study as it progresses, because I can definitely relate it to me when I was growing up as a child. Like I used to have a lot of anger actually as a kid, um, but then somewhere between I don't know, like after high school, between college, like it felt like I just all of a sudden wasn't angry anymore. And I think it was really just suppressed. It was like all of a sudden where I just became just didn't get
Yes,
angry like at all. Um yeah, so that
yes,
I'm very curious about how that study goes. And something I've noticed also is potentially I'm sure there's maybe still some suppressed anger potentially. But I've done a couple of breath work sessions um where I'm kind of doing intense breathing for maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. And in many of these sessions, the predominant kind of emotion that I was able to feel and let go of was anger. And I remember some of my really deep breathwork sessions was really just like I had this kind of rage inside me that it was very interesting too, because I wasn't even aware of it, before that. Um, but it was clearly in
yeah,
me and it was clearly in me because there was just so much, rage that came out during that breath work. Um, yeah, I didn't
yeah.
actually think too much
Interesting,
about that,
interesting.
but yeah, that sounds like a really
Mhm.
interesting study.
I think for people who have experiences like this, where suddenly there's some anger and you're feeling it, and you're like, I think it sounds like a great practice for like there's anger, you acknowledge it, you feel it. Try noticing in the next couple of days after that if you feel any difference emotionally in social situations. I think that's a test everybody like can just do for themselves if they allow themselves to to feel anger, to see if there is anger. I'm not saying there must be, but uh, to just see if your anger, if you when you feel anger, your anxiety somehow changes. Maybe it
Mm,
does, maybe it doesn't. It's something we are still studying, but
mhm,
there are already some reports that this might be happening.
mm. Yeah, very interesting. And I think yeah, there's definitely something to be learned in this study.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, very very cool. Awesome. Yeah, we already I think have been a bit 2 hours, so maybe
yeah,
it's best we wrap up. Is there
yeah,
any final message or tool or anything you'd want to share with anyone that's struggling with social anxiety?
yeah. I think one last thing I would like to say. I mean, it's just some of that already said. Like first of all, like just realize how common this experience is. You are not weird because you have experienced this. It's a very common experience. It's normal. We are hardwired to be that way. Um, so what you're going through is a normal human experience, and there are ways to get better. You don't have to get rid of it. Uh, Instead, I think thinking of it as changing your relationship with your social anxiety, um, that is something you might focus on instead of getting rid of it.
Mm,
Saying, okay, how can I relate to that? Because it's anxiety, shame, insecurity. These are things that are part of the human experience, and you will experience
mm,
them again and again in different situations. Sometimes more strongly, sometimes less strongly. Uh, what really matters is how you think about that, how you relate to these feelings. And I think what Alex said with self compassion is a great reaction to uh, having this experience because they're difficult, and being kinder with yourself in these situations, that's great step into the right direction. And
mhm,
yeah, I wish everybody the best who struggles with that. And Alex and I, we are also no gurus who know all the answers. Nobody does.
mm,
Social anxiety is one of the big mysteries for me, at least. Uh, and yeah, we're here to learn more about it every day.
mhm. I love how passionate you are about it. It's very obvious, and I'm sure there's so much resources you're already providing that are helping people. And yeah, thank you so much for all your content and doing these studies. I think it's just a real service to the world. So appreciate you for doing that. And is there any, if someone wants to learn more about you, is there any resources or anything you want to share? I can leave it in the show notes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in general, just head over to conquersocialanxiety.com. I offer a free 7-day course for everybody who wants to join. It's just to make sure that you have all the basics about social anxiety. It's not a course that teaches you how to overcome it specifically, but it basically uh, opens up all the like information that you need to know. It's what are the symptoms, what are the diagnostic criteria, what are medication options, well, what are the therapy options. There are some practical tools like mindfulness in it, and once you've done the course, when you enroll for that, you are on our email list, and that's also where I share information when the studies that we are doing are published and so on. And I'm also working on an online course that will launch this year. So if you're interested, you can feel free to sign up for the course. You will get all the information there.
Awesome. Okay, I'll leave a link to that in the show notes. All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Martin. It was such a pleasure speaking with you today.
Yeah, the same for me. I'm really excited to speak to someone who's as excited as I am about the topic and who's interested. And yeah, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sticking with us till the end of this episode. If you liked the episode, please leave a review on whatever platform you're listening to. It makes a huge, huge help for us. So please do that. We have some amazing people already lined up for the next several podcasts. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.